April 20th meeting of the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board. We'll just get started here with the roll call.
Okay, both Andy Mefford and Josh Schrader advised me that they could not attend tonight. They are going to be absent. Sean McCoy.
Here.
Sean McCoy is present. Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Micah Sewell.
Here.
Micah Sewell is present. Neva Hassanen.
Here.
Neva Hassanen is present. Toon Pham.
Present.
Toon Pham is present. Jim Bashand.
Here.
Jim Bashand is present. Shane Morrissey.
Present.
Shane Morrissey is present. Vince Caristo.
Present.
Vince Caristo is present. Mr. Chair, there are 7 members and 1 alternate present. Would you like to appoint Mr. Bashand as a regular voting member tonight?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on April 6th, which I was not in attendance for, but it was nice to see that business was conducted, a robust meeting was had. Are there any comments on the minutes or revisions?
None. Move to approve as presented.
Okay, thanks. Jim, is there a second for the motion to approve?
Second.
Seconded by Dave, I believe. Great, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are passed. Okay, next up we have staff announcements. We have one announcement from the county. Lindsay, are you here to?
I am.
There we
You
go.
guys hear me?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, I just really quick wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update on the zoning code update. I'm sure that most of you know this, but we've been working on an update to our zoning code for the last almost 2 years now. And this has been a long and wonderful process. And yeah, it's been a little while since we've kind of had a check-in about this. So I wanted to let you guys know where we're at and where we're going from here. So it's been a big winter of internal staff review. We've been dissecting and refining the policy and making sure that the code is cohesive and practical. And we've also given it to agencies, Missoula Rural Fire, Public Works, City of Missoula, to get some feedback so that, they also make sure that it makes sense and there aren't any conflicts or anything like that. And all of this has been internal, and we are finally at kind of the final stages of that phase. And we are now, kind of working on a completed draft of the zoning code. And what this means is that we'll finally be able to give something that we're proud of for public review and start releasing it for steering, or stakeholder meetings, and making sure that we do get comment from community groups and collect public comment before we start working on sort of a final draft. So this final stage of the process, we should be finished with this current draft and giving presenting a public draft hopefully within the next few weeks. We're shooting for mid to late May. And at that point, that's when we'll begin, stakeholder meetings, community groups, and things like that. And also during that phase, which will continue through the summer, we would like to give you guys plenty of opportunity to work with the draft and work with us on the draft. So we're hoping to plan and propose a series of sort of workshops with the planning board. And, these will be, identifying key issues in the plan or with the key issues in the code, and then working with you guys on, your suggestions and then integrating it. And then, kind of during these workshops, this will also be a really great time to sort of familiarize you guys with the layout of the code, and make sure that, you've got a pretty good grasp of what we've put together. And so yeah, that's sort of our thinking for our next phases. And yeah, I wanted to throw it out there if you guys had any questions about that process.
Great. Well, thanks for Lindsay for the update here. It's
Yeah.
great to have this on our radar at an early date, and plan to take this up over a series of meetings in the future. I think it's a good idea too. So if anyone has questions for Lindsay, please ask them now. Nita.
Lindsay, so when do you anticipate it would come to the planning board? Maybe you said that and I missed it.
Oh, so it won't come before the planning board until we have the final draft. So after we go through the public engagement process, which we'll go through this summer, we will then collect all the comments that we received from stakeholders, from community groups, from you guys, and we'll work on a big final draft. And we're hoping to have that done by September. So hoping to get it before the planning board, so that you guys can actually, discuss it, and yeah, we can begin that sort of more official process. End of September is what we're shooting at. September, October. That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah, it's really been pretty drawn out, which is disappointing because so much development is happening, and we really need to zone the peri-urban area as soon as possible. And I know that there's been challenges, to get to where we are now. But I would just like to urge as much speed at this point as we can, because this is something that is really long overdue. And anyway, so that's one point. My question is also, another question I have is, so is this essentially going to be a form-based code?
No, it's a little bit of a hybrid. So the code.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
I asked I'm sorry, my internet's not great tonight. I asked if it's going to be a form-based code.
Yes. And yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Great. Yeah, so it will not be a form-based code. It is a bit of a hybrid though. It's a hybrid sort of form-based, use-based code. So it's very design, there's a lot of design focus to it, which is sort of the staple of the form-based code. But it won't be that in entirety. And we can go into that, in a little bit more detail in the coming months, especially as you get to see a draft of the code. But this won't be something, exactly like the Switupcane code that we just, passed.
Right.
But it has similar elements, and it's got similar intent to really think about design and cohesive, uses in this area to really build good community.
Great, thank you. That helps
Yeah.
a lot. And my, sense of urgency is somewhat spurred by the legislature and their, we just need to get this into place. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Any more questions for Lindsay? Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay. We'll look forward to seeing more from you in your office.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Moving on, we'll move on to the public hearing for tonight. We have one public hearing, which is at 21.
Could
Say
we
what?
could we jump back to the public comment, just in case we have any that's not on the agenda?
Oh, of course, Donna. Thank you
Thank you.
for catching that. We skipped right over that. So we're going to go to public comment right now. So if anyone who is watching would like to, this is to make a comment on an item that's not on tonight's agenda, this is the time to do that. If we could have, thank you, Heather, for putting the call-in information on the screen. So for folks who are dialing in by phone, the numbers on the screen here. The number to dial is 1-253-215-8782. The meeting ID is 842-9399-6424. And if you're in the Zoom app, once you log in to the meeting, please use the raise hand function in the Zoom console. And if you're dialing by phone, you'll need to press *9 to raise your hand. And I'll call on folks in the order that I see them, people who have raised their hand. So with that, I'll go on mute. There's a delay between us and the broadcast, and let folks call in who'd like to speak. And we'll go from there. So give it a few minutes. Please call in to make your comments if you'd like to. Okay, the first person to talk will be Jeff. You've got your hand raised. If we can. Great. So I should have the capability to speak. Hi, Jeff, are you there? Jeff, it looks like you're unmuted. If you want to check your equipment, make sure your microphone is turned on. Okay, we'll give Jeff some time and others time to call in. Jeff, you do have the capability to speak and to unmute. So as soon as you get your technology figured out, we'll be able to hear from you. Okay, in the meantime, we're going to move on to the next caller. So caller with the phone number 1406 ***801. If you could please state your full name, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello.
Hi there.
This is Jeffrey Collins. Do you hear me?
I do, yes.
Okay. Sorry, the technology is a little challenging, and a number of my neighbors also wanted to join that I contacted, but they're even less technically inclined than I am, and they were having difficulties with the phone. So I'll just speak for my personal interest. I guess, do you take the comments first, or do you wait until after the presentation's been made by the planning board?
Yeah, Jeff, are you hoping to speak on the River Road rezoning tonight?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, if you could wait until after the presentation from staff, we'll have another period of public comment where you can make a comment on that at that portion of the meeting. So if you could hang on and call back at that point, that would be the point in time to comment on that item.
Okay, thank you, Vince.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Jeff, are you also the Jeff? Did you log in on Zoom as well under the name Jeff?
Yeah, because I wanted to observe you guys, and I've double taken because I was frantically trying to connect.
Well, I'm glad we got you, and that's all I needed to know. So thanks. We will move on to other folks. So thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely.
We'll hear from you later.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there are a couple other people who are in the waiting room who haven't raised their hand to talk. If you'd like to speak at this time, please use the raise hand function. And I'll reiterate what I said to Jeff. If you're intending to speak on the River Road rezoning, that should occur later in the meeting when we take up that item, which will be next. Okay, there hasn't been any additional activity in the waiting room here. We're going to close the public meeting or the public hearing, the public comment portion of the meeting rather, and move on to, finally, appropriately, the public hearings for tonight, which we have one at 2103 River Road, a rezoning from RT10 to RT 5.4. And Dave DeGrandpré is here from the city of Missoula to present the case.
Good evening, board members. This is Dave DeGrandpré with City of Missoula Development Services. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Dave.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Well, as Chairman Caristo introduced, this is a rezone application at 2103, 2103 and a half, 2105, and 2105 and a half River Road. The current zoning is RT10, 2-unit townhouse, and the applicant seeks to acquire the zoning of RT 5.4, 2-unit townhouse. There is a mistake on this first slide. This is not the city council public hearing. This is the planning board public hearing. I failed to change that. Sorry. Moving on. So the property that you can see highlighted in blue is located on the south side of River Road in a largely developed area of the city of Missoula. River Road functions as a collector. It links North Russell on the east side and Reserve Street on the west. Surrounding the property, it's a fairly built out area with primarily single family detached units and also duplex type units. It's residential in nature. There are some underdeveloped or undeveloped parcels still remaining in the neighborhood. Actually, there's a subdivision, if you can see my cursor, to the east that we may be seeing here within the next several months as well. But it's an area that's urbanizing. There are still several septic systems and individual water systems, wells in the area, but sewer and water services are also available within River Road. River Road, it does not have a lot in the way currently of pedestrian facilities, and it doesn't have a separated bike lane. The 2050 long-range transportation plan that you've been working with our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, on has recommended that River Road become a complete street, so to speak, with pedestrian facilities, bicycle facilities, and other types of improvements. That's a planned project. The plan is, or the 2050 long-range transportation plan has not yet been adopted, but it's well along its way. It's a planned project. Funding has not been secured for that project yet to make this a complete street, but it's on the priority list. The zoning surrounding this property is all RT10, and there is an unzoned parcel that's still in the county. Actually, that green area is not within the city limits. And then there are a couple of other zoning districts. There's a planned unit development located a short distance away to the east, and also RM 2.7. And this is a snippet from the growth policy map, the long-range plan for this area. And so it recommends a designation of residential medium density, that's 3 to 11 units per acre for the subject property in the surrounding area. And as you know, there are certain, in the growth policy, it calls out certain districts, zoning districts, that relate to that larger land use designation. And there are 4. There's the RT10, which is the current district. There's also an R8, R5.4, and then what's proposed tonight is the RT 5.4. So these are all 4 relatable districts. All of these districts are residential. They're they're urban scale certainly, but not high rise. They all have a kind of a similar, they have similar types of, detached, attached duplex, maybe 3 units, maybe townhomes. They allow townhome exempt developments, but they're generally lower scale. The idea with this area, this designation, the residential medium density, is that it recognizes that this part of Missoula is primarily single family and 2-family type residential housing, as opposed to a more dense, more intensive type scale. So here's a comparison of the 2 districts, the RT10 and the RT 5.4. You can see that the building types are almost identical. They allow, again, detached houses, lot line houses, 2-unit houses. The one difference with the RT10, it does allow 3-unit townhouses. The main difference between these 2 districts is the density that's allowed. So the minimum parcel area and the minimum area per unit, this is in square footage, is 10,000. Okay, 10,000 square feet per unit in the RT10. In the RT 5.4, it's 5,400 for both the minimum lot size or parcel area and also area per unit. So it's a slightly higher density that's allowed in the RT 5.4. But other than that, the setbacks are identical. They require 20-foot front and rear setbacks. The interior setbacks, the street side setbacks, they're the same. The maximum heights are the same. Again, the main difference is the density, slightly higher in the RT 5.4. The subject property is 38,420 square feet in size. Currently, there are 4 existing dwelling units on the property. I'll show you an image of those in just a minute. And the RT 5.4 would allow, upon redevelopment, up to 7. So it's the potential for up to 7 dwelling units if the zone change goes through. And then everything else, all of the other parameters of our zoning can be met. And by that, I mean any new development or redevelopment would have to meet setbacks. It would have to meet parking requirements and other elements. So, but potentially up to 7 units could be developed if this zone change were to be approved. Here's a zoomed in or closer up look at the subject property. You can see that there are 4 homes located on the property. The 3 homes in the southern portion, 2103, 2103.5, and 2105.5, are shown on the Montana cadastral system as being built in the 1940s. They're smaller, modest homes built in the 1940s. And then there's a mobile home that's kind of in the central portion of the property, this larger area. There is a private street that comes in that serves these homes and also some other homes, adjacent homes. And if redevelopment were to occur on the property, there would have to be certain changes under the city's building and engineering standards. The private street would have to be improved. The river road would also have to be improved. The developer would be responsible for improvements like sidewalk, like drainage improvements, boulevard trees, things like that. And then also the property is served, I mentioned, by a well and septic systems. If redevelopment were to occur, then the septic system would have to be abandoned and the new development would have to connect to the city municipal sewer. The water system could stay in place, but once it fails, a new well cannot be drilled within the city limits for potable water for the home. So essentially, when that fails, they would have to connect to city water as well. So it's an incremental process. I mentioned that there are a number of private sewer and water systems in this area. Over time, as redevelopment occurs, as failure occurs with those systems, because the public services are available, then connections would have to be made. And here's a map showing city water and sewer. The yellow lines are the city sewer mains. You can see that the sewer flows here from River Road, or along River Road from Russell on the east, off to Reserve on the west. These are actually manhole locations, these little circles that you see. And then the blue lines show city water mains. So water mains, right, both sewer and water are right in River Road. And the nearest fire hydrant is right here at the intersection of North Curtis and River Road. It's about 300 feet from the property. And so looking at a zone change, of course, one of the main criteria that we have is the growth policy. Does it comply with the growth policy? And as indicated in the staff report, my recommendation is that it does, because it really supports a focused inward approach. Again, it would allow a slightly increased density in an area that's already served by good transportation corridors, by water, by sewer. It's close to lots of different services, whether it be schools. There's a park right here called LaFrey Park. This is easily accessible. In fact, via sidewalk, it's less than 2/10 of a mile away. Milwaukee Trail is located down Curtis. Curtis is it's a local residential type street. It has pedestrian facilities along it. You can get to Milwaukee Trail, which can take you into town. It goes a lot of different places and links up with different trails. There is a transit stop located at the intersection of North Russell and River Road. Unfortunately, at this point, there isn't a bike path or pedestrian facilities to get there. That's located about 6/10 of a mile away, but transit is available, and that's a main route that I believe there's a stop about every 15 minutes during the work week. So it's in any event, this zone change would support compact development. There is existing infrastructure in the area, and it's really kind of in the urban core for the city of Missoula. So I believe that it does support the focus inward approach of the growth policy. And I've kind of touched on all of these a little bit in passing. The staff report goes into a little more detail, but this zone change would facilitate public services such as transportation, sewer, water, police, fire. Those are all available. It would support compatible urban growth as well, although we have not seen, and maybe the developer can speak to this a little bit, because the questions that I've gotten so far, I don't have any written public comments. That's why they weren't in the file, weren't provided to you. But the questions that I have received, really people are saying, well, what does the developer want to do on the property? Why the zone change now? And so I have not seen a development plan. I hope that the developer can address that a little bit tonight, because I'm sure that's on the minds of neighbors. But I believe it does promote compatible urban growth. It's in alignment with the growth policy again, and the growth in this area is it's urban scale again, but not highly intensive, and the zoning would also permit that. It promotes public health and safety due to transportation facilities, the public water and sewer that are available, again, police and fire, etc. And I also believe that it considers the district character and sustainability and suitability of use because of all of the items that I've mentioned already. So no need to belabor the point. And then tonight is a public hearing, and the board is asked to make a recommendation to city council. And in your packet and also on the screen here is a recommended motion from staff. So that concludes my presentation, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thanks, Dave. I think we'll do questions later, but is the developer here? Paul Forsting. You might be representing the developer.
I'm not the developer necessarily. I'm Paul Forsting from IMEG Corporation. I'm a planner. Maybe an important point. I don't develop anything. I just help folks with applications, and I help them. I help them get here and tell their story. And so, but it's often I'm called the developer, and that is just what it is. So this property is owned by Josh Eater. Josh is here today. Josh inherited the property from his father, and it's had 4 rentals on it for quite some time. The current 4 rentals don't adhere to zoning, and so the zone change was appealing to Josh for a couple reasons. But one is that it allows for compliance with the existing 4 units that have been historically on the site. Currently, the zoning only allows for 3 units. But the 4th unit would be permitted with this zone change. Josh is selling the property, and he's there is somebody looking at buying it, and they would like the extra units to add to the site. And so there is, although I don't have any plans for what that would look like, nor have I been approached by the buyer. So my assumption is they're probably working with somebody else, or maybe they have their own plans for how they're going to bring water, sewer, roads, turnaround into this site. It would be tight to do. It would be difficult, but I know working with the city, you probably could figure something out with that regard. The immediate plan for the site that I'm aware of is the buyer wants to start fixing up a couple of the units, and they were focused on the 2 furthest to the south. I believe those are the 21.5 2103 and a half and 2105 and a half. Those are the two units located furthest to the south. Those units are in the worst condition, and the buyers already looked at remodeling them and decided they'd have to demo them. They actually had to do a methamphetamine test, and both of those units tested positive. And so, given the condition of those two back buildings, and then just the process for removing the methamphetamines, it sounds like it's going to be much cheaper to just demolish those back two units. I haven't heard any plans for what would be done with the other two units, but it's my understanding that they would work on the back two units first, and then maybe work their way across the site and add 3 units as well. And so we have 4 units. The goal would be for the eventual buyer to get to 7 units, but for right now, we're just asking for the. It makes sense just to bring it in compliance, if for no other reason. I appreciate Dave's staff report. Glad to have a recommendation for approval. I agree with all the positive things he said. This is infill development. It's the growth policy is in alignment with this request. We have this, the residential medium density growth policy designation has come up on a couple projects I've worked on. And in those cases, we've all, those were annexations, but they had rezones as well with them. They didn't make it to the planning board because of the way that works in an annexation process, but just wanted to bring those up. And those were over off of Grove Street, and at least the ones I can think of. And they did come in with the RT 5.4 zoning. And so we have seen this zoning designation be used in this type of, in this growth policy designation. With that, I'll hold any further comments and just be available for questions. Josh is here as well. If I can't answer it, he could probably do a good job of answering it too. So.
Great, thanks for that, Paul. And Josh, if you'd like to say anything at this time, you're welcome to. If not, that's okay too.
I don't have anything else for to say. Paul said it very well. You know, I don't know the exact plans of the buyers, but they want to move slow. I've expressed to them, you know, importance of keeping the folks in place there. So 2 of the 4 folks for the foreseeable long-term couple of years, as far as I've been communicated with, would remain in place. As Paul said, this kind of was prompted with the drug test and having to do something one way or another for the safety of the people living there. So that's all I have to say at this time.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh. So before we go to public comment, Dave, could you give us just a summary of the law regarding the pertinence of development plans in assessing a rezone, considering a rezone? I think, you know, before we do public comment and have board member questions, I just want us all to be on the same page about that.
Sure. So a development plan is not necessary to request a rezone. Any property owner has the ability to request a rezone. And the planning board can request a rezone as well as can city council. But anyone has the right to request a rezone on their property. And it's not dependent on a development plan. So for example, you know, there's always a concern with a development plan that a developer could put forth a beautiful plan, and then once the rezoning, you know, take everyone down a lovely road, promising all kinds of great things would happen on the property. Then the rezone occurs, and someone else, you know, maybe the developer changes the plan, or, you know, things happen in this world. Someone dies, or property changes hands, someone goes bankrupt, etc. So we do not make changes to zoning based on a particular development plan. The idea, and this is codified in Montana law, is that a zoning district, in this case, the RT 5.4, that's applied in one section of the city has to be equally applied in another section of the city. It's not dependent on a particular plan the developer puts forward. So this is why I know it's a little frustrating sometimes, actually, for the board, also for city council and for citizens, because there's uncertainty as what could happen to the property. But we also trust in our zoning, and you know, the RT 5.4 has certain uses that are allowed, a certain scale of development that's allowed, etc. And we also have good systems in place to make sure that there's buffering, for example, with setbacks, landscaping, also good street improvements, sewer and water improvements, and those sorts of things. So there are systems working, I guess, at the same time. I know that the public process really focuses on the zoning, but there are other ways to make sure that proper and appropriate development occurs that's kind of in the vision of the city. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No, that was really great, Dave. Thank you for that. And Josh, you've got your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add, as Paul mentioned, this land been in my family for a long time. Care about the neighbors, care about the people that have lived there. The two that are staying have been there for a long time. And it needs some work. The improvements around the area. I don't have the means to continue that development and doing those things. So I feel this is going to be improvement for the surrounding area and those in that immediate area. So that's all I wanted to say.
Great, thanks for adding that, Josh. Okay, so we're going to move to the public comment, public hearing portion of this. If we could please have the call-in instructions on the screen. We've already heard from at least one other person who'd like to make a comment on this item. We'll go to that person first. So if you'd like to make a comment regarding this rezoning proposal, please follow the instructions on the screen. If you're listening in, the phone number to dial is 1-253-215-8782, and the meeting ID is 842-9399-6424. And whether you've called in with your phone or used Zoom, please use the raise hand function to indicate your desire to speak. On your phone, you will do that by pressing *9. And so with that, we'll go to the first person who's on the line. It is Jeff, who has called in. I believe, Jeff, if you could say your full name, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
I'm sorry, I missed that last comment.
Jeff, so if you could state your full name, and then you'll have 3 minutes to make your comment.
Okay, will I be allowed to send in comments at a later date then?
You are, well, we are going to make a recommendation tonight to City Council, and so comments after tonight would probably be best directed to City Council. They could also be sent to city staff, who would assemble them and send them to City Council. So,
okay, can my 3 minutes start now?
Yes, we'll start now.
So as I understand, it's 3,800 square feet. My preference, I support planned development, but I prefer at 10,000 square feet per unit, or in this case, I think a fair zoning variance would be to have 4 properties in this area. I think it's misleading, the report by the planning board, that Dave worked on, that this is in order to bring it in compliance with zoning. If you look in this whole area, it's an intermixed number of homes with private residential and a few townhomes. But if we were to follow that example, that in order to bring it into compliance, we have to double the density. It's not a slight increase in density, it's doubling the density. And if you look at LaFrey Lane, which is just to the east of the property, if you displayed a map for reference to the board there, that a majority of those properties are at 6,000 feet to 4,700 feet. I could give you a list of those. One of them is 3,300 feet. So already all of the properties on LaFrey Lane on the west side of it are not in compliance. There's a number of places that aren't in compliance. Hendrickson Street, part of that. Skya, the planned unit development that happened on Skya is not in compliance. Those are townhomes. I object to this level of increased density, as I worked on previous zonings that were part of a community structure many years ago. First, and I'd also like to ask a question, is the zoning change request based on the property description of ownership, or is it based on the map overlay that you constructed? Hello?
Jeff, we're not going to have a back and forth here with questions, but if you want to restate your question for the sake of the planning board members, we'll make sure to relay that question to city staff and have it answered later in the meeting, okay?
Yeah, I'd like to know if the overlay is based on the property description of the owner that's requesting the zoning change, or if it's based on the overlay. Because if you reference that map, and also what the area calculation for the property is based on, because this map is in error, and I would be embarrassed if I was both the developer and the planning board to submit this map, because it shows my ownership on it. In the the northeast corner of that property, behind the trailer, there should be a lot line proceeding north, and there's a 1/4 acre that's included on this zoning. Now, if you want to include me in the zoning overlay, then I'll have to consider that. But as currently displayed, this is wrong and misleading. What else have I got? And does the growth policy, the way it's described, you're trying to say that the growth policy supersedes the zoning that's in the area. So now, apparently, growth policy supersedes all zoning, and zoning no longer matters. Anyway, I'm frustrated, and a number of my neighbors are too, about the increased density. We like to see this property developed and improved, but we would not like to see it at the highest density level that is being proposed with the change in zoning. Thank you for my opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, we'll move on to the next person. If there's anyone else who would like to speak on the proposed rezoning, this would be the time. Please use the raise hand function in Zoom or on your telephone by pressing *9. We've got a couple of participants in the waiting room who do not have their hand raised. If you'd like to speak on this item, please find your way to the raise hand function and we'll call on you. So I'll give it a couple of minutes here and wait for folks to indicate their desire to speak. Okay, seeing no additional folks who'd like to speak on the item, it's been open for some time since before Mr. Jeff began talking. We'll close the public hearing and move on to questions from planning board members. This time, planning board members, please feel free to fire away with questions to planning staff here, Dave or Paul and Josh, who represent the property owner. Would anyone like to kick us off? All right, Shane, you're first.
I guess maybe just to make sure that to ask Jeff's question, or at least hopefully I'm getting this right. We're certain that these are the property boundaries that are owned by the developer present.
Let me, Paul Forsting from IMEG. The important part of the application is with regards to what's getting rezoned is the legal description. There's a legal description in the application, and that was based off deeds and ownership. But it's, we provide these simplified exhibits, aerials, and those I'm not surprised if an aerial gets off skew and doesn't maybe accurate. I'm not sure exactly the part of the property that Jeff was referring to, but I'm confident that the legal description and that this zoning action is only applicable to Mr. Eater's property.
And that property in the description, in the legal description, is the 38,000 square feet that you're petitioning for.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's 38,000 square feet, and that's where I did the math where we could get 7 units with that.
Great. Is there an easement existing on the property for that private road?
There is, yes.
Okay. And I'm seeing, and this is probably for Dave, I'm seeing that there's no comment from city fire. And was there, well, I've run into instances where city fire would comment on drives that don't have turnarounds associated with them. And has that, just wanted to see if that was if that was discussed with fire or anything like that, and just wanting to make sure that that's been considered.
Well, so thus far, City Fire has not commented on the proposal. I think if the property were proposed for redevelopment, then a turnaround would be required. But at this point, there's an existing condition. You know, the zoning doesn't change. Whether the zoning is R10 or RT10 or RT 5.4, it doesn't change the existing conditions. But if the property were redeveloped, then fire would have something to say about it. Sure.
Cool. All right. That's all. Thanks.
Great. Any further questions? I have a question, Dave. I mean, I noticed that when you listed when you place side by side the RT10 and RT 5.4 characteristics, the setbacks and the building height were exactly the same. Is that because they're both relative, or the RT10 is relatively low density, and you can have the same number, you know, a doubling of units without changing the, you know, maximum footprint of a building? But you're still muted.
Yeah. I haven't gotten used to that yet. Okay. So I think the question is, or maybe the issue is, as you can see from this table, the setbacks are identical in the RT10, RT 5.4. Why is that the case? I guess I'm not sure. You know, with the 10,000 square foot lot, I think that the 10,000 square foot lot or 10,000 square feet of area per unit, it just allows a larger lots, more yard area. But certainly a home can fit on both of those parcels, whether it's 5,400 square feet or whether it's 10,000 square feet. I'm not sure that I'm getting to your question, actually, Vince.
Yeah, I think you're answering. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, you know, as to what extent the zoning is, you know, fitting with the character of the area, which is transitioning, and it's not rural, but it's, you know, it's not high density. And I mean, it seems to me like both of these zoning districts are relatively low density. Yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, the observation I made along those lines. So thanks, Dave. Okay. I don't have any further questions. If there are no further questions from planning board members, Neva, sorry. There you go. You have the floor, please.
Thanks, Vince. I think this is a really great area to increase density. And I, you know, because the Missoula, you know, took back our water essentially, and the water system. This is an area where we can invest in water infrastructure. And I say this because there are a number of parcels out in that area where, like, there's, as I understand it, as I recall, I could be wrong, but, you know, like sort of places where there's folks are on well water, community well water with mobile homes and stuff. And a number of times those have, been incompliant with the water quality standards. So my question is for Dave, because you mentioned like what it would take until the wells fail before it would have to be hooked up to the existing well the existing well would have to fail before they would have to hook up to the city water. Is that correct? And, is that a good, we're going to go through?
Neva, I'm not sure I heard the end of your question.
Well, my question is, you said that the well would have to fail in order for them to have to go onto city water. Is that correct?
Well, so I had a conversation with the engineering department, with folks in the city's engineering department, and what I heard was that upon redevelopment, the new development would have to connect to city sewer.
Okay.
However, would have to connect to city sewer, but under city policies would not be forced to connect to city water. Of course, they could choose to. The developer could choose to connect to city water. It's available, but apparently, and I don't have a lot of history in this, as you know, I haven't worked for the city for all that long, so don't know all the ins and outs, but I was told that the city would not force new development to connect to city water until failure of the well, because no new wells can be drilled within the city. But certainly city water is available if new development chose to connect.
What does failure of the well mean? Is that water quality or quantity standard? Do you know what I mean? Like, because one of the problems in this River Road should be developed and with density, but it isn't all hooked up to water. Believe it or not, even though it's right in town, they're not all hooked up to city water. So that's what I'm asking. Why wouldn't it automatically be part of city water?
Yeah, I don't know the thought that went into that policy. I wasn't around at the time, but I can tell you that failure can mean a couple of things. Certainly it can mean physical failure. It can mean a well caving in, for example, or just, failing to produce. It could also, I'm assuming, and maybe I'm going out on a limb, but I assume that if there are water quality tests that demonstrate that there's, safety concerns, I'm probably getting a little outside of my lane here. I don't know exactly what the rules are, when that can be forced and that sort of thing. But certainly, I would think that there are some public health requirements for water quality within a drinking water system.
Yeah, and maybe that comes up when they actually do the permitting for the buildings and stuff. Because I'm just saying that area, it's a hodgepodge of city and well water. And since we bought the water system, we need to get everybody on the water system so that they're getting safe water, because it's right in town. Do you follow me? So maybe that comes up later in the process. I support this proposal in general. I think this is an area where we want density. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Neva. For that, Sean, you're next.
Thank you, Vince. I think I just have a couple of questions for Dave, the Grand Prix. I'm wondering about that private road service to the other homes, and if there is like redevelopment, is there any possibility that that road can be altered so that those non-property homes, that aren't on this lot don't get service? Is that possible in any way, or is the city going to be like, no, we can't do that?
I can't speak with great authority about this. I do recall seeing an easement some time ago that granted access to those properties, but I certainly don't have the details memorized. Maybe Paul or Josh could speak with more authority about that than I.
Let me just say that access is in the easement, and that's the only access for those folks. So we don't have the legal rights the landowners would have to abandon their own access easements, which they wouldn't do or be allowed to do, I think. So there's an easement in place that guarantees that those accesses will continue to be there.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure. And then my other question that I'm kind of curious about is that what triggers redevelopment? Like at what point does redevelopment get like identified? Like if they take down the 2 homes in the back, is that redevelopment, or does it have to be the whole lot is raised? Is there a threshold for that?
Well, I think that if, for example, if one of the structures was to be demolished and a new structure was built in its place, I think that new structure would be required to connect to city sewer, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of curious, like if there's some type of threshold for the like designation of redevelopment. So one house like being raised, that's considered like needing to apply for redevelopment.
Yes, I think any building permit that's applied for would trigger improvements to the street, would trigger connection to city sewer, things like that.
Okay, cool, awesome. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Sean. Micah, you are next.
Great, thanks, Vince. I have a process question for Dave, or possibly for planning board members that have been serving for longer than I have. In the application materials, it says, that this will provide an example for neighboring property owners who might want to explore their options for redeveloping their own properties. This is a single owner choosing to apply for rezoning. Is that what we typically see? In my mind, it seemed like this process would more commonly work as the city designating an area and saying, we want to change the zoning in this area on a larger scale. I understand both are possible, but I guess I want a little bit of context if we see projects like this applying for very specific rezoning coming up fairly often.
I can address that a little bit, Micah. So I think in practice, it's more often than not an individual landowner who sees an opportunity and requests a rezoning. But in theory, it would be probably better and a more comprehensive approach for a larger scale rezoning of property to occur. So for example, when a new growth policy is developed or a growth policy is updated and there's a new land use map that's produced, and the city has a strong vision for what might happen in a particular area, and the public's been involved, the planning board members have been involved. It's been a good, thorough process, a good, strong kind of unified vision for redevelopment or growth in a certain area. I think it works best, and it's again a more comprehensive approach when the city might initiate something like that, because you can consider all kinds of things, different goals that the city might have, like providing housing or putting commercial in a certain area to serve that housing, and other improvements for infrastructure and those sorts of things. It's a heavy lift, though. We've had this conversation. We had this conversation, I think, in the winter, maybe it was December or something like that. It's a big project because a lot of people, there's a lot of opposition to things like that sometimes as well. People don't want to see change in their neighborhood. They're concerned about what might happen. It's a lot of unknowns. So it's there are pros and cons of both approaches, certainly. But again, I think in practice, it's oftentimes the property owner who sees an opportunity, who sees a need, who makes a specific proposal.
Okay. If there are any further questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Toon?
Yeah, I had a similar kind of process question around, this is more up from a timing perspective. So in the packet, it indicated that this lot was essentially grandfathered in, and that's why it's fine. So from a process perspective, could this have been done as part of a redevelopment process as well, versus requesting it now? Or is the idea here that the buyer and the seller, they wanted to get this rezoned in advance of any sale. So
Dave or
maybe
Paul, either way, yeah. Or both.
Yeah, Paul Forsting. I think it's an important point of emphasis that you don't need to have development. There is no such thing as redevelopment. That's not a process. Redevelopment isn't a process that we go through. When you apply for a building permit, that's where you come into the city and you have to be reviewed for development, for development rules and regulations. But Josh has been considering rezoning this for a long time. We talked about it 3 years ago. We applied for this, gosh, almost a year ago now. And Josh has, his plans have changed and he's now selling it. But the folks who come and do, I'm not sure that they'll have any exact plan, or their plan right now is to remodel the back two buildings. So that wouldn't look, on paper, wouldn't look like very much. It would just show, two buildings with the thing that says to be remodeled. Now, when they do that, they're going to have to figure out where they put a turnaround in there, and they're going to have to figure out sewer. And I think it makes a lot of sense to bring in water at the same time you do sewer. So even though there's that fail clause, when somebody's actively bringing in sewer, roads, you would want to bring in water at the same time. It wouldn't make any sense. So just practically. So there's not a development plan per se. There are other projects I'm working on where we do have a subdivision development plan. That's usually we'd find it. I don't know that there's any plans to subdivide this land. I think they're just going to keep them as rentals. And when you have all rentals on a property, you don't go through a subdivision action. You guys might be surprised if you don't already know this, but you can build as many houses on your property as zoning allows without going through any type of special review. You just go through building permitting to do that. And so where we always get into a conversation is when I propose to subdivide the property, then it gets really technical. But really, we're talking about the difference between home ownership and rentals. And when we do rentals, you don't have to have any of those protections. People just get unreviewed and put onto a property. But if there's no subdivision, there isn't really a development per se. That maybe I think you're looking for, but I'm just trying to guess at it a little bit. So I guess long story short, with rezones, there is no clause for having to have a plan. The idea is that the plan comes as a result of getting the zoning. It's a little presumptuous, I always think, to come and go and get a $100,000 development plan together and say, all it relies on is just you getting the zoning approved here now. Really, the zoning should be first before you start drawing up the plan. You should say, okay, what's my zoning options? And then, okay, now what can I fit on there? And that's what's happening all around the city. So hopefully I answered it.
No, thank you, Ed. That was super helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, that was a really good question. Thanks, Tim. Okay, further questions from board members? Dave, could you put or Heather, put the proposed motion on the screen for everyone? If there are further questions, please feel free, raise your hand at this point. But if there are none, I think we should move to a motion, and I would welcome a motion from someone. Should be on the screen shortly, either as proposed by staff or otherwise.
I'll move. If that's okay with everybody.
Thank you, Shane.
I'll read it. Do you want me to read it?
Could you please read it? Yep, that's the convention.
I move that we approve the adoption of an ordinance to rezone the subject property located at 2103, 2103 and a half, 2015 and 2015 and 2105. Is that quite right? Sorry, I think there's a typo in there. River Road and legally described as that part of Lot 24 of Cobbin and Dinsmore's Orchard Home subdivision and parcel of land lying on Lot 24 of Cobbin and Dinsmore's Orchard Homes addition located in Section 20, Township 13 North and Range 19 West, PMM from RT 10, Residential 10, 2-unit townhouse to RT 5.4 residential 5.4 2-unit townhouse based on the findings of fact in the staff report.
Thank you very much, Shane. Could we just clarify that we have the numbers right? Did you say those again?
I believe that it should read 2103, 2103 and a half, 2015, or 2105 and 2105 and a half. I think the 2015 is incorrect.
I see. Yeah, is that
That's true. My mistake.
okay? Great, well, good catch, Shane. Okay, is there a second for Shane's motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Sean. Okay. So motion is made and seconded. Everyone, if you'd like to make a comment before going to vote, this would be the time to do that. Traditionally, board members will sometimes indicate how they're going to vote and why. So Dave, you're first.
Thank you. I want to contrast this small project with McNett Flats, where basically there was a rezoning, what I called a pig in a poke, a huge project on a large parcel of landing, and a huge array of potential development scenarios. In this case, it's different in the sense that there are super limited numbers of potential development cases. In effect, it should be assuring to the neighborhood, and for me it is about, oh, now we don't have this wide open, who knows what we're going to get density and type. We're going to get houses up to a density of and consistent with a neighborhood. And that's, I wanted to put that out there because I think this is consistent with the neighborhood and meets all the rest of the test needed in it. And whether the future developer stays at 4 units or goes to 7 would be good. That'll work too. So yeah, we're approving a zoning with a really limited scope of what the actual development can come up with, and I'm comfortable either way. I wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dave. Anyone else like to make a comment? Sean.
Thank you, Vince. So let's see. I just wanted to state that I'm going to be voting in favor of this. And this is my neighborhood. Like, I live like right down the road from this. Our farm is very close. And I listened very carefully to Jeff's comments, looking for something, you know, because I usually weigh heavily towards public comment, public feeling. But I just can't see as many drawbacks to this. The setbacks are the same. One of my concerns at first was height requirements, whether somebody was going to get some big tall thing in their backyard, which everybody in town's kind of heard about, but that's not possible here. We've got the height requirement stays the same, setbacks stay the same. We're just looking at the possibility of an increase in 3 units, which to me seems reasonable. Another thing that I like about this is that I'm not having to make a decision based on agricultural land. One thing that I would like kind of challenge or push back on Neva about this neighborhood is that it is a really mixed use, and that there's still a couple of nuggets of agriculture left in this neighborhood that, in my opinion, need preserving, only because of soil. There's literally like the deepest, richest soil in this neighborhood that you could possibly imagine. And there's only a little bit of it left. And all of it could go to feeding the people in this neighborhood. And we're not even the best example. River Road Farm is by far the best example of that. And I think the last comment that I want to make about some of my concerns with developing this area is traffic. And it's good to hear that the city is thinking about River Road, but I would also like to put it out there that the recent changes have made Curtis and Wyoming unbelievably busy. And that those are definitely some areas, and who knows if this will get, thought about by city, but that need to be looked at, and sooner rather than later. And I could assume that Davis maybe is also getting busier. But, living on the corner of Curtis and Wyoming, like I have seen the changes to Third and Russell and what they've done to the amount of traffic and people trying to sneak onto Reserve. So I thought this was a great presentation. I thought the city did a great job. Dave, the Grand Prix, I appreciated you sending things out a little early. This time of year, that really helped me out. Wanted to thank you for that. And I think that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sean, for your comments. We should be hearing from the MPO again in the coming months, I believe, with their long-range transportation plan. So we can ask some of your transportation questions at that point. Any other comments before we move to a vote? I haven't heard any sort of oppositional comments yet tonight. So, okay. Okay, we'll do a vote. Hey, Neva.
Huh? No, I was saying call the question.
Oh, okay. I heard your voice, and then you went blank. Okay. Great. So all in favor of the motion that's been made and seconded, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Dave, for your presentation, and Paul and Josh for answering questions, and good luck. Okay, we'll move on. The next item on the agenda tonight are communications and special presentations. We have two of them. The first is from Aaron Pahan from the City of Missoula Community Planning, Development, and Innovation Department. Welcome, Aaron. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. Let me figure out my screen really quick.
All right, I can see your PowerPoint, Aaron.
All right, it's coming up.
Yep.
Wonderful. Perfect. So good evening, Erin Pahan, Director of Community Planning, Development, and Innovation. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm excited to spend some time with you and share a little bit about what we're up to at Community Planning, Development, and Innovation. Our department is a newly formed department merging what was previously referred to as Development Services and Housing and Community Development. And we've had some time, about 5 months under us now with this new structure. So it felt like a very good time to come and talk with Planning Board and share some of our successes, some of our current focus, and what we hope to be working on in the next 3 to 6 months in our department as well. So tonight I want to talk just briefly with you about our mission and organizational structure, how that has changed under the realignment. Again, review some of our accomplishments to date and some of the things that are challenging for us that we're working through, as well as our remaining priorities. And then most importantly, answer questions that the Planning Board may have about our current operations and our direction as well. So to start, I want to talk about our mission. Part of the primary focus of the realignment was really to look at how we could restructure departments within the City of Missoula through a mission orientation. Our goal was to provide more efficient and more effective services, but to also make sure that we were aligning and collaborating with new and deeper ways within our community. So in addition to, again, providing those more efficient and effective services, CPDI is allowing us to focus on the shared mission of promoting equitable growth in a resilient and sustainable community. So we achieve this through 2 distinct yet very interrelated and aligned teams. Community development is focusing on achieving that mission through the creation of innovative programs, policies, and planning. That division includes the Community Planning Division, which was formerly known as the Long Range Planning Division, the keepers of our growth policy, and some of our broader based planning. Things like the Sufficiency Plan, which just recently came to the Planning Board and was passed by City Council. It also includes our Office of Neighborhoods, which is our primary point of engagement, not just as it relates to development activity and land use, but as it relates to all issues that matter to neighborhoods and individuals who live in those neighborhoods. It includes our historic preservation work, as well as housing and homelessness. So all of our work around our Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Reaching Home, our 10-year plan to end homelessness. It also includes our energy conservation and climate action work and our environmental justice work, which occurs through our Brownfields program, where we identify and work to clean up sites that have been contaminated by hazardous or petroleum waste in our community. Our Development Services Division works to achieve that mission through the efficient and responsive application of code and the delivery of development services. So these teams are comprised of folks who engage in development review. Our land use team, Dave DeGrandpre is a great representation of the skilled professionals we have there, as well as our building department and our code compliance efforts as well. And it's really important to note that those two teams work across teams and then more broadly with other departments within the city through a functional work team model. So we're constantly gaining expertise and technical experience from across the city and even outside the city with the county as well. So our mission and the goals and the tasks that CPDI invests in are steeped in the City of Missoula's strategic framework and our 5-year strategic plan. This framework is the basis of our work planning and what we prioritize within that work planning. And it really focuses on the areas of safety and wellness, community design and livability, which is where a lot of our department's work lives, environmental quality, economic health, and organizational excellence. And so I want to just provide the planning board some updates on some of the successes that we have achieved since the realignment and some of the things that we're working on. And I'll try to group these into our strategic planning categories so you can see how that work ties more broadly to the mission of the City of Missoula. So in the area of organizational excellence, CPDI has worked really hard at an operational level to implement the realignment. So the work that we're doing to make our services more efficient, more mission oriented. We also increased our capacity through the new organizational structures that I showed you by filling key positions that we were struggling to fill previously. And that includes bringing on additional planners to support development review. We also worked really hard to retain and to provide training opportunities to the staff members that we do have and to adapt in the midst of a pandemic, which I think everybody in our community was struggling to do. However, even with our strained capacity through the pandemic and through those open positions, we did still pave the way for construction of 585 homes through preliminary and final plats, along with 3 multifamily buildings and 1 TED project. These numbers only represent activity through January 1st. So as many of you know, you've seen a lot of projects since then, and we have several numbers to add to that as we come to year end as well. In addition, we issued over 7,000 permits. 554 were for residential homes. So those include single family homes, townhomes, and rental homes as well. And lastly, we awarded nearly $1 million in community-based assistance to support COVID response and recovery, to provide emergency housing and additional support to our homeless response system, and to rehabilitate homes in our community to serve everyday Missoulians. So those could be roof repairs, mold mitigation, ADA remodels, a variety of things to help folks stay in their homes. In the area of safety and wellness, we expanded the emergency winter shelter through a collaboration with the Pavarello Center at the Johnson Street Community Center, which is formerly known as the South Hills Evangelical Church. And we provided funding to the Missoula City County Health Department to reduce the transmission and community spread of COVID amongst those who are living on the streets or in shelters, which are very high risk environments for COVID transmission. We also supported ongoing planning for over 200 affordable and permanent supportive housing homes, rental homes, and a navigation center, which is kind of a drop-in center, first point of contact for folks who are chronically homeless living on the streets. All right, in the area of community design and livability, this is some of the most relevant work that we do in CPDI in relation to the planning board. We made a lot of progress, most of which came before you and you're probably already quite familiar with. We presented the subdivision recommendations report and moved into the implementation phase of that. So working to streamline our code as it applies to our TED and subdivisions. We amended code primarily around accessory dwelling units to support affordable housing and the implementation of a place to call home, our adopted housing policy. And we adopted the Setepkin plan and the accompanying form-based code as well. And I think you guys will soon start to see some of those first projects under that new form-based code come before the planning board. In the area of housing, our partnerships moved us closer to breaking ground on over 430 permanently affordable rental homes in our community, which we'll see come on the market within the next 2 years. We also partnered with the private sector to construct an estimated 70 permanently affordable homeownership opportunities. And this is a project that you've likely read about in the Scott Street area on land that was recently acquired by the city of Missoula. In addition to bringing those 70 permanently affordable homeownership options, this project also will provide an infusion of around $1.7 million into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so that can help us reach a deeper population of folks through homebuyer assistance loans with those 70 homes, or allow us to spread that assistance across the community and address affordability in other neighborhoods as well. We also partnered to hold a Green Building Summit, and I saw many of you participating in that summit earlier this year to encourage sustainable building practices. We adopted a 100% clean electricity initiative and developed an implementation plan, and we reviewed some of our first adaptive reuse projects since the overlays adoption in 2019, which was really exciting for us. Oops. And lastly, in the area of economic health, we continue to identify new sources for that Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is one of our key strategies for ensuring that we have both affordable rental options and homeownership options for folks who would otherwise be priced out of the market. And that's going to bring our estimated 2022 balance of that account to $2.4 million. And that account was just established last year. So we're really proud of the momentum that we've made there. And then we're moving towards the redevelopment of city-owned properties to meet our current and future housing needs. We're engaging in some master planning around the Broadway corridor that might help us inform how we redevelop sites like the Sleepy Inn in the future. And we'll be following suit with some planning activities around the Payne Block and in other areas in town where the city owns property, like the Johnson Street parcel, the MRL Park parcel as well. So it would be remiss of me if I didn't also talk about the challenges that we faced in the last year. Our achievements were hampered by what was, by all accounts, a very challenging year for everyone. In the first half of the year, we faced significant staffing and capacity issues. We entered the pandemic with several key positions in our department unfilled, perhaps most importantly, the director position. We also have a lovely team of land use professionals and employees across our division who have very young children and school-age children. And so balancing parenting and teaching and working in the pandemic, I think, was a challenge for everyone. And lastly, just the sheer pace of development review has created capacity issues, even with all positions filled. This isn't a bad problem to have, especially in a community where we're facing stark housing supply issues, and we want to see that development activity. But it's also thankfully a problem that we can fix, and we're working hard with City Council and the development community on a capacity plan to ensure that we have enough staff and we have efficient processes in place to make sure we're meeting development review timelines and that we aren't serving as a barrier for the new construction of housing. And then in addition to our capacity challenges, I feel compelled to note that our division is really challenged with solving some of the most complex issues that our community is facing, solving in partnership with our community. These include housing and homelessness, equitable growth, energy conservation and climate action, and inclusive engagement with our community. There's an ever-growing need to align those responses and the work in that realm, which is why this mission-oriented realignment was so timely. Now we can ensure when we're having conversations about equitable land use and growth and development that is infused through a lens of energy conservation and climate action and housing affordability. And we're looking at all of those things in conjunction and not singularly in a siloed fashion. So we have just a few months left of the fiscal year, and we're working hard to focus on what is still left on our plate. We want to incorporate the lessons learned from our COVID operations while working to bring our teams back, fill our remaining vacancies, and continue to build capacity so that we can be responsive to the development community. And then complete the final phases of our realignment. We're about 2/3 of the way there, and we have some additional work to do. From a services and program perspective, we do want to present a plan to City Council and the development community to help relieve that bottleneck that we're seeing in terms of development review. And we do want to work with the broader community to create a scope of work for a broader based code reform that is going to help us align our various regulatory codes with our city goals around equitable growth and development. A lot of that tension we're feeling on a regular basis, whether that's at the staff level or at the planning board level, as I witness you talking through some of these projects, and at the City Council level, that tension of our code not really being in alignment with what it is we want to see, the outcomes we want to see in our development. And so that's a primary goal of ours, is to get that work started. And I just want to close again with our mission, because that is so key to everything that we do, and highlight that we will rely heavily on partnerships in the community, whether that's our partnerships in climate action work with organizations like Home Resource or Climate Smart Missoula, or our partnerships in developing affordable housing with the Homewards of the world, that we rely on those partnerships to achieve our mission. And we rely on our partnerships with our boards and commissions, with the planning board as well. So look forward to continuing having conversations about how we can move in that direction together. And so with that, I would love to answer questions you all have about our department, about our realignment, or about anything that I shared tonight.
Thank you very much, Erin, for your wonderful presentation. It's great to have you in your position, and it's great to see all the things that your new department is embarking on. So yeah, planning board members, please raise your hand. We'll go one at a time if there are questions for Erin, which I'm sure there are. Jim, why don't you go first, please?
Hey, Erin, how long have you been in the role now?
Just a few days, over 5 months.
Well,
Or 17 years, depending on what it feels like.
It doesn't feel that long, but it feels like you've been in it for a while. And for what it's worth, I mean, I just think I've seen significant changes over the last year, and I think your leadership is shining through on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Erin, could you maybe address one of the questions that came up tonight? I mean, is your department at all considering a neighborhood-wide or area-wide zoning change as part of those changes you discussed at the end there?
I think that's a great question, and I think largely we want to hear from the community. We know that there is misalignment in terms of our code today. And that's just a byproduct of our code is over 20 years old, and our staff have brilliantly worked on an annual basis to make targeted changes and shifts and to try to adjust it as best they can. But it's time to do an overhaul. And does that overhaul include changes in zoning to align our zoning to what we recommend in our growth policy? I think that's a big question for the community. What do they want to see happen there, right? Do they want to see that initiated and driven by the city, or do they want to see that initiated and driven by developers on a project by project basis? So those are some of the things we're going to need to hear from the community on to help us define the direction of that project.
Great, and I'll say, I'm sure you're aware, Erin, but one of the things that comes out more, sometimes more often than others, when we have individual rezonings, is the complications of, considering the right zoning for the area. And we didn't have too much public comment today, and it wasn't as controversial seemingly as some of the ones we have, but it sometimes puts the planning board and ultimately city council in a really difficult position trying to establish, what an appropriate level of upzoning for a particular area is when you have individual properties coming. So for me, I think that's the biggest benefit of doing something like that, where you can actually have an opportunity in an area-wide rezoning for a neighborhood to really consider where they are and where they want to go, and have their input in an appropriate form, that establishes the direction and trajectory of the neighborhood, rather than on an individual rezone where it might not be appropriate to consider all these different things. So
I think there are several benefits to looking at a broader area rezone, and I think the development community would counter that reduces risk as well. Paul mentioned that earlier today, that it is a relatively large risk to purchase a piece of property under the assumption that this appears to meet rezoning criteria. The growth policy states that this is an appropriate level to rezone this parcel, but I'm going to purchase it and take that risk. And there's a chance that it isn't rezoned, and then that developer has lost their investment. And so I think there is a level of clarity and transparency that provides both to the neighborhoods to know how their neighborhood is going to continue to grow and develop, and to the development community to know what level of risk they're taking when they purchase a property as well.
It's great to hear you say that, Erin. I think, for all the challenges that have been mentioned and are somewhat obvious in embarking on something like that, I think there's a lot of benefit, as you described, to a lot of different folks. So I think it's worth doing. I think a lot of folks on the planning board do too. Tim, you're up. You'll be next.
I actually have 3 questions. I don't know if should I pose them all at the same time? And
yeah, why don't you have a discussion a little back? That sounds great.
Yeah, so I have 3 kind of varied questions. One, can you comment at all, or if you have an opinion, given your position, about the perception of Missoula's growth, especially with a lot of people coming from out of town, or again, this perception? I don't know if you've seen that, or if you have an opinion and how that might affect your planning. A second question, kind of unrelated, is as it relates to code considerations, and now that you have purview over a number of different issues, will we start to see things like climate change and energy efficiency, that kind of stuff, be more directly reflected in the code? Or is that a preview of what we're going to be seeing coming up? And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is there things that the planning board can do to help this whole process? Like what would you be looking to from us as we embark on this in the next few months?
Great question. I think the question of growth is an interesting and a challenging one, and I think that there are trends that are related to the pandemic, and then there are trends that are related to general growth. And so we are seeing migration into our community. And we have been seeing that for many years. Missoula is an incredibly beautiful place to live and work and play and raise a family. And so I don't think we're going to be able to stop that, nor do I think that we're going to see that decrease. So we do have to plan for that. We do have to make sure that we're thinking about development and growth in ways that plan for folks coming to our community and that do not leave folks who are already in our community behind. And that is a primary focus of our work. How do we ensure that as we grow in a way that continues to provide opportunity for all of our residents? And that will look differently for some. For some, it will be a safe and secure rental home that they can afford. For others, it will be an opportunity for home ownership, which in our country is the primary way through which you gain equity and wealth. And so ensuring that we have opportunities at every level for folks to move through that housing cycle, I think is going to be increasingly important, while also acknowledging the diversity that growth from folks coming into our community brings as well, the richness and diversity that brings as well, and to plan accordingly for both. I think as it applies to code, we are in a place where it's time to ensure our code reflects our values. And that could be our values around transportation and multimodal transportation and alternative transportation. It could be our goals around sustainability and climate action and energy conservation. And it will be our goals around open space and our values around affordable housing as well. I think the challenge that we have is in balancing those. I'm a firm believer that you don't have to trade one thing for another, but we also have to acknowledge that we won't get total wins in all areas. A great example is looking at communities who have been very aggressive and successful and preserving a lot of open space and maintaining open space goals and have wonderful code around mandating certain levels of energy conservation and climate action. Those communities have less affordable housing as a result of that. That's just a simple economic reality when you look at land values and you look at the cost of building very highly energy efficient construction, green building. It just costs more. And so we have to figure out what the right balance is there. I think we don't abandon any of our values, but we figure out what the right balance is so we can address all of them and figure out where we need to incentivize, where we need to invest, what the city's role is to make sure that we're achieving that. And that's what we hope to do through our code reform efforts, is to be able to sit down at a table and align those and be conscious of trade-offs that we have to make and make those decisions as a community. And then I think lastly, what can the planning board do to support these efforts? I think continue to be an open and inviting and accepting audience to engage in this dialogue with us. That we talk about wanting to kind of ground truth some of our assumptions and get a sense of what direction we should go in, what the community wants to see. I think planning board is first stop for that, right? That you ultimately are all representatives of your neighborhoods, of your communities, representatives that have a deeper knowledge of land use than the average citizen. And so I think that this board is going to be really important to us in terms of being one of those touchstones for our work. Are we on the right path? Are we engaging in that alignment and that balance in the ways that our community wants to see? So I think that will be really important as well. I think continuing to understand the planning board's needs helps us as well, right? What can we better do to provide you the information that you need to make the decisions that you're having to make on a weekly basis as well? Vince mentioned, it's really difficult to make some of these decisions around zoning designations and the right designations. And, how can we provide more context on our planning documents? How can we provide additional information to help the planning board make those decisions with a little bit less tension or struggle. And so I think that the give and take of that relationship is really important as well. So, how can you support our efforts by continuing to be a really important source of information and ground truthing for us? And then how can we support you in implementing our work, right, and our plans and our policies as well?
Any further questions for Erin? Okay, I have one more, Erin. One of the goals in the housing policy that was passed maybe a year ago or longer was to come up with a policy to address the displacement of mobile home residents through either city-owned or city-funded projects or otherwise. And that's an issue that comes up from time to time here. It's also puts us sometimes in a tough, essentially moral bind. I'm wondering if you're able to at all speak to what the discussions or efforts you've been doing in that area. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a real struggle for staff and city council, and I'm sure the planning board and others. And unfortunately, I think we're only going to see more of it in the coming years. And so we have been working really diligently to research and propose some displacement policies for the city of Missoula. We're pretty limited in state legislation, unfortunately, not unlike we are in many, many areas in terms of how we can approach this topic. It's largely a carrot-based approach. We can work to incentivize developers to provide some displacement support, to provide education, to provide as much notice to tenants as possible. Sometimes we're lucky and we have the ability to leverage other opportunities, whether it's urban renewal district funding or maybe there's some kind of a right-of-way vacation, or there's some other aspect that we can condition, and we can address that on a project-by-project basis. But globally, we're working within a framework that allows us to incentivize displacement policy for developers. And so we're in the process of developing some recommendations around that right now, that we hope to be bringing before City Council later this summer to start to develop a program. And that program can utilize the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the resources contained therein to support whether it's the relocation of a mobile home. Unfortunately, many times those mobile homes are old and can't be safely moved or relocated. So it might be assisting with getting folks into a rental apartment, but looking at how we can pair some actions on the developer side with some access to support through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Thank you, Erin. Dave, did I see you put your hand up? No, okay. Neva, but you did.
Erin, thanks so much for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. It seems to me that the new department is a big structural change within the city. And you have just done fabulous work on housing in our community and leading the housing policy development. It's been fantastic. And if you read our Missoula growth policy, which, by the way, was the best public policy process I have ever been through in my entire life, and shout out to Laval and Tom for that. But that policy really articulates what we want as a community. And that policy was developed through so much community input. Housing is one element. And the lack of affordable housing is a market failure. And the other things and values that are articulated in the growth policy, reflect more than that, I guess, is what I want to say. I don't mean any disparagement to the importance of affordable housing. I have dear friends who are looking for housing. I don't want them to leave. I get that. But there's also a really strong articulation in our Missoula growth policy of the value of the community character, the environment, a desire to integrate food and farming into our community, not seeing that as separate, like something that happens elsewhere. And there's it's actually a fabulous document. And I'm partly saying this because some of these members on the planning board are new. This is my 6th and last year. And I was very involved in the Our Missoula process, and we're going to be updating it now, Erin. But we never put it into zoning. We never actually implemented it. And you could go back 5 or 6 years in planning board minutes, and you would find so many times where we as a planning board said, when is the city going to rezone the city, or at least start doing it section by section? And so, so I guess, one of the things that I am a little concerned about is that the crisis around affordable housing is going to usurp our long-term vision, or could usurp our long-term vision for rational community-based planning. And Missoula is so primed for this. We have done so much. Just because there are these market failures, we can create communities, neighborhoods, that people want to live in, that aren't just subdivisions where you have to drive everywhere. And that's what's so great about this soup to cane plan, right? So I guess I'm just saying this and asking to I guess my question is, how do you feel as somebody who has a strong social work background, has done excellent work on housing, how can you balance those other needs that the community and values, not needs, the community values that we have going forward with this new configuration? Thank you. I'm sorry to go on so long. And I'm really happy to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And the way that we kind of view it as a team and as a department is we have these tangible things that we're working on. And so affordable housing, and we take a 2-tiered approach to that. It's really, we have the market-driven approach, and then we have the subsidized approach, where we recognize the market will never produce housing for folks who are really income restricted. They'll never produce housing for folks who need that bump up to get in home ownership. And so we're looking at that approach. So that's something we're doing, right? Like we are going to tackle affordable housing through these various strategies and techniques. Sustainability, equity, resiliency. Those aren't tasks. Those are lenses through which we view every piece of work that crosses our desk. And I think that's what keeps us grounded in that, maintaining our character, remaining what makes Missoula, Missoula. That's a lens, right? That's not a task. That's not a one and done instance. And so as we engage in affordable housing, that work is done through the lens of equity. It's done through the lens of resiliency, through the lens of sustainability. As we look at code reform, as we look at our work around the 10-year plan to end homelessness, we infuse all that work through that lens. And I think that's how we hold that paramount. That's how we don't allow the urgency of an issue to usurp our values and our priorities as a community. And like I said, I'm a firm believer that you don't have to trade your values, but we do have to acknowledge that we can't win everywhere all the time. And whether that's on this project, maybe we can really get deep affordability, but we can't quite get whether it's the trail connection or the type of parkland, or that we might not get that thing here. But in this broader area, in this broader neighborhood, in this broader community, how can we make sure that on the next project, we're not making that trade, or we're making a different trade, and that it requires us to think differently. It requires us to always maintain that macro level view. So we're not making short-term decisions or short-changing ourselves on a short-term basis. And it's a long game, right? And it just takes laser sharp focus. But I think we have the right structure and the right strategies in place to do that. I think we have the right support through our elected officials and our boards and commissions, like the planning board. And I know we have the right people and folks like Dave and his team, and you mentioned Lavelle and the folks that are engaging in this work. The brain trust of the city of Missoula blows me away on a daily basis. And so we have all the ingredients in the recipe to do just that, to grow equitably, to maintain our resiliency, to grow in a way that is sustainable, not just for me and my children, but their children and their children. We just have to be more strategic to make sure that we engage in that work.
Just a quick response. Thank you so much, Erin. My concern is that the city is not prioritizing planning. And I hear you about the lenses, and that's fabulous. But planning is much more than that. And so I'm concerned that we have not had a planner be head of the planning in, I don't know how many years. And I'm not saying you're not capable of it, but I kind of hoped that you might say, you know what, Neva, you're right. And that's why we're going to get these resources to lead these people, and to get we have the opportunity for cutting edge planning here, Erin. And that's, I'm not critiquing you or anything. I'm just saying that I'm concerned that the new structure de-emphasizes the role of planning.
Yeah, and I guess my response to that would be, we have the most brilliant planners in the state, maybe even somewhat in the nation, and we have over a dozen of them. And my job is to provide them all the resources and tools that they need to continue being the most brilliant planners in our community, and to provide them the structure that they need to be successful there. I think what you're asking for, Neva, is exactly what we're proposing. When we say broad-based code reform, we don't mean we're gonna pull out our red pens and start marking up documents. We mean we are going to bring in a cutting-edge firm to drive and guide that work for us, and that we're going to engage in a lot of process on the front end with our community to understand what we need. I imagine it will be a process akin to the 2015 growth policy, which I agree was one of the best planning efforts personally I have ever engaged in. I was at the Poverello Center at that time and was engaged heavily as a partner in that work. And that's exactly how we need to undertake these code change efforts, and that's our plan there.
Thank you so much, Erin. Appreciate it.
Thank you for answering all our questions, Erin, so thoughtfully and in depth. Yeah, and I'm sure, as you said, development's going to continue to happen at a really fast pace here in Missoula. So good luck to you and your staff as you try and keep pace and make progress.
Thank you. I'll look forward to coming back and updating you all again soon.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break before we get back to our agenda. We've got a couple more items left, but we'll break for 5 minutes and come back at 8 o'clock. Okay, we've got almost everyone back. We can get started again if Bailey is here. So the next item tonight is an update from Bailey Minnick of Missoula County. She has a presentation for us going through some of the questions that we've raised over the previous months on sort of general planning and process areas. So Bailey, there you are, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, number one, can you guys hear me okay? And can you see my slides? I'm remaking my little picture of all of you a little bit bigger, so hopefully I can see you guys too. It's the technology challenges.
Looks good, Bailey, thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so this is kind of, we've had trainings before in the past, which I know a number of you, especially the newer members, have been through kind of discussions with us, both with the city and the county staff, as far as kind of everything planning like 101, I guess I would say. And some of the questions that we've had or that have come through Karen, through Dave, down to me, and kind of the impetus of my presentation here tonight is some more in-depth questions as to what the role of planning board is, you know, a number of different topics. And so that's where I'm kind of starting with this evening. And so I'm calling it the story of subdivision, of a subdivision and other planning projects, but we'll kind of delve into some other things as well. Hopefully my slide. So this is just mainly I set up this presentation kind of as a backbone to kind of go over a number of things, begin some discussion. Obviously, we can veer off topic if there are questions you guys have as well. But I figured this was kind of a starting point to discuss with you all. So one of the questions we had was, you know, where does planning board fit in the subdivision process? So I'll kind of start with that. Other planning processes that the planning board may be involved in that you might not see as often. We've had questions about growth policy, issue compliance. You know, Neva brought up a number of questions this evening as well, kind of in that. Questions on how we guide the public and developers and why we come up with X, you know, or recommendation of an X. And then finally close out with some assistance to planning board members on some of these tough projects, or when you feel like you have a tough project and a tough decision, what are some options that you guys might have to kind of go through and help with that decision. So this is a flow chart just to kind of start off with. It's in our subdivision regulations, and I know the image is probably really tiny on your screen, and I can send you the picture or where it is in our subdivision. This is for a major subdivision, and I took that because obviously major subdivisions come to planning board. So the flow chart, I kind of put some arrows around. It starts up in this corner, step 1 with scoping meetings, and I'll get more involved in kind of all these things. And it flows kind of around to the bottom and then right around back at the top. And I put a big red star, and that's where planning board is involved in. So there's a lot of steps that happen before it gets to planning board and that public hearing. And then there's steps that have to happen after that as well. But that's kind of just a brief kind of where you guys fit in. So the steps before planning board. Most projects start off with a scoping meeting, or it basically a general inquiry into it. State law for subdivision does require what we call a pre-application meeting. So a scoping meeting is a pre-application meeting. That's usually when someone says, hey, I have this idea, and what are your thoughts on it? And we sit down with the property owner, potential developer, consultants, and we also include agencies and other department reps for a full open dialogue with property owners and the consultants. So we kind of loop scoping and pre-application meetings together in one meeting. They're generally about the same. The pre-app usually is a little more complex because that's generally right before they're going to submit an application. And so a lot of times if they've done a scoping meeting, it's more for those fine tuning of details, making sure everything they have in their application, nothing's going to surprise them right when they submit an application. For major subdivisions, like what come to planning board, they also have to complete under, and this is under county regulations. I feel like the city has a lot of similar aspects, but obviously I'm coming at it from a county perspective too. But our regulations under the county requires that the developer do what's called a neighborhood meeting prior to submittal of the application. So usually it's after they've had the pre-application meeting and right before they're going to submit, they have to send out a notice to the neighbors and say, we're going to have this neighborhood meeting, and get their feedback. Then once they submit the application, it gets kicked into what we call element review, or I've also heard it called completeness review, depending on jurisdictions. And that's really, does the application have every piece of paper? It's not necessarily, you know, did they fill it out correctly? It's like, we have an application, we have property information, we have, you know, check the boxes kind of a thing. If there's anything specific that was called out in a pre-application meeting, that could be something we'd look for as well. But this has to be completed within 5 working days of submittal of the application. So it's really just a check the box kind of thing. If it has everything, then it gets kicked in what we call sufficiency review. And that's, is the actual piece of paper sufficient for us to review it? Like, is their sentence not just a complete sentence, but does it make sense? Are they actually giving us what we need to look at in order to give a whole picture of it? This also, under the county process, does include our official agency comment period. That is something the developer does during sufficiency, is they send it out to a list of agencies that we provide them, say, here's our stuff, give us our, you know, have any comments that you have. And this is completed within 15 working days. So generally the 5 working days, the 15, I mean, right there is a good solid month of just, is the application even adequate for review? Now, one thing I did put at the bottom, element insufficiency review can repeat as often as needed. So very rarely, and I've had more minor subdivisions that have been granted sufficiency the first go around, but a lot of times major subdivisions especially could take a couple iterations of this sufficiency review. And there can be some lag time between when we say, nope, you're insufficient, to when they resubmit that information and restart that 15 working day process. So that's where there can be this lag time from when a developer says, we've been working on this project since December, and it's getting to you guys the following September, for example, almost a year to get it in front of you, is because there can be these lag times between how long the developer is sitting on this insufficiency letter, whether that's their sanitation issue or something like that, or their flood study isn't right or something, you know what I mean? There can be a lot of kind of wiggle room in that. So that's kind of where it's, in a small part of the process, it's kind of taken out of our hands as far as the timeline in keeping things going. So let's say the subdivision, it's sufficient, yay, we're moving through the process. This is when the actual review of the application would start. So we notice public adjacent property owners within 300 feet of the property. They actually get a certified letter in the mail saying, hey, this is going on, contact our office for any questions. We also post the application on our website, so it's all available digitally, as well as they could come into our office and look at the application. We put a legal notice in the paper as well. And we really do our analysis of the application. So we really look at the criteria within our subdivision regulations, or whatever regulations we're looking at, talking about subdivision in this case, but and we look at our standards that we have. So really it's the black and white kind of side of things. This is the standard in our regulations. Is it meeting that? Yes, no. It can include more discussions with other agencies. Sometimes we as staff have back and forth with the fire department about specific requirements. We may involve the developer as well. Different comments. We've gotten an agency review. And we really try to craft those conditions of approval to mitigate any potential impacts. And this is where we're really trying to determine, is it something that is supportable by the office? Can we make these impacts mitigatable, using big words tonight, with conditions? Or is it something we can't feel that conditions could mitigate these impacts, and therefore we have to recommend denial of an application. So this is where we get a lot more discussion. And once that happens, this is when it gets to planning board, right? We've completed our analysis, we bring it to you, and it really is kind of that black and white picture that we have. These are the standards, does it meet it, does it not, kind of a topic. And that's where you guys also fit in as the community and the public hearing. You are like supposed to be the place where the most amount of public comment is supposed to happen, and that discussion is supposed to happen in a public forum. So there's a couple timeframes that kick in with subdivisions. Major subdivisions with less than 50 lots, and this is again under county regulations, have to have the governing body reach a decision within 60 working days from the date we grant sufficiency. Major subdivisions with more than 50 lots have an 80 working day time frame from sufficiency. And then minor subdivisions, which you don't see, but I just thought you might be interested in knowing, have a 35-day working time frame from sufficiency, and they skip planning board and they go straight to the governing body. The main thing that's in the Missoula County subdivision regulations is that we cannot delay the governing body decision by basically either comment or non-comment by public agencies or other utilities. So the fact of, say the fire department says, oh, we missed public comment and we have comments and concerns, you need to stop the process. We can't stop the process. The only way the process can, or that timeline could hold, is if the developer basically says, yes, I understand. Oh, the fire department wants to comment. I am basically extending my time frame and stopping that voluntarily. So that's some of the issue that I know planning board members have felt as far as having to make a decision, not being able to table or continue a discussion, is because without the developer voluntarily doing that, it can't, like, it just has to keeps going. So that's where a lot of times we try to give you the most information, because we know that this clock is ticking, right? It's going kind of down the road. So what happens after planning board, after you guys have your tough conversations and you listen to all the public comment and you're up late at night? Where does it go? What happens after that? Obviously, as you know, subdivisions go both to the county commissioners or the city council, depending on city or county projects. Again, minors skip that and go straight to city council or to the governing body. And if approved, then there's this final decision that's crafted with these conditions of approval, and everything is good to go and they start their project. But there's this whole other part that happens that really can take this weird amount of time. Subdivisions are automatically, whether major or minor, are given 3 years right off the bat to meet their conditions before they have to file for final plat. Obviously, as you guys are aware, extensions can be granted to those by the governing body. They have to be requested before it expires. And the final plat process includes submittal of the information of how they've met the conditions, documenting their compliance, review by multiple agencies, and ultimately the recording of the documents. The problem is that between preliminary plat and final plat, it's really outside of our control, whether they submit it in 6 months, whether they take 3 years, or whether they ask for an extension. A lot of these things that dictate that time are completely outside of our realm of time. DEQ approval is a great example. On even a minor subdivision, I've had them where it can be 4 months just to get their DEQ approval, even longer for bigger subdivisions. Obviously, infrastructure building out, building roads, sewer lines, things like that can take years of time to do. And then, things like fire conditions, there's calculation of cisterns and hydrant facilities. And so there's a lot of things it's really easy for us to say, oh, here's a condition, get your DEQ approval. And really it could be taking, years of process and planning and money and all that kind of stuff to actually get these projects going. So that's where it's really taken out of our hands, basically, to kind of give an estimate of how long they take. And then there's weird ones like phase subdivisions where they, at the time of approval, they say, we're going to split it into 9 phases, and they set out, every 2 years is a new phase. Well, that just pushes it way down the line as well. And then obviously extensions can do the same thing. And then there's even what we call bonding or subdivision improvement agreements, which can be placed by the developer or agreed upon between the governing body and the developer at the time of final plat to say, oh, I don't have all my infrastructure in place at this time, but I'm going to bond for, usually it's like 125% of the cost of what needs to be done. And I'll have it done by this date if you let me file my final plat. And so that can be an agreement that then if they don't meet that, the county or the governing body can call their letter of credit from the bank and say, oh, they didn't do it. They owe us this much money and we have to go out and do that project, or we have to go out and use our resources to pay to get that done. So that's kind of subdivision in a big nutshell. But what else could you guys hear at planning board? You guys also hear, as of tonight, just an example, rezoning applications. You guys also hear, you've had me come before you twice for what we call at the county special zoning districts or rural zoning districts. You can hear planned unit developments. You can hear regulation text amendments, subdivision regulations, zoning regulations. Our county shoreline regulations actually come to you. The planning board, if somebody asks for a shoreline variance, the planning board is actually the place that you would hear that discussion. So there's a lot of other things that don't come up very often, but you are the main place to have these types of public discussions and these interactions with the public. And obviously growth policy, neighborhood plans, issue plans. I mean, you've been seeing a lot of those types of things go down the works too. So I'm going to let Tim handle the growth policy compliance and analysis section, and then I'll jump on to kind of finish it up.
Yeah, thanks, Bailey. Yeah, the next slide there. Thank you. As you all know, the growth policy are essentially guiding documents for land use. And just as an example, growth policies typically recommend at a given location residential, commercial, or industrial land uses, or they may recommend open and resource uses, parks and open space, etc. And these are recommendations that we review subdivision against, whether they be in zoned locations or unzoned locations. And in the case of residential subdivisions, which is what you see most often, you'll see recommendations for particular densities, whether it be 1 home per acre, 1 home per 5 acres, 1 home per 10 acres, or in more dense urban situations, 6 to 8 to 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre. You'll also see within growth policy documents goals and objectives that are recommended by those documents, and we review subdivisions against those goals and objectives. As a result of all these reviews against the growth policy documents, growth policy analysis for subdivisions, and really for rezonings too, but more for subdivisions, ends up being more of an art than a science. Growth policy documents are not regulatory, and so really what we seek is to have that particular development be substantially compliant with the growth policy. We can't look at a land use map that comes out of the growth policy as if it's a zoning map. It's making a recommendation. It's not regulatory. And state law is very clear that you cannot condition or deny a subdivision based solely on growth policy. So as far as whether or not a subdivision is substantially compliant with the growth policy or not, sometimes there's some gray there. It's not necessarily a clear analysis. Well, hopefully it's a clear analysis, but what the outcome of whether a particular development is substantially compliant is not as black and white as some may wish. I think next slide is yours, Bailey.
Yeah. So one of the other topics we have had questions about is how providing guidance to the public and how staff does that. And we always get the question, well, how did you come up with this recommended density, zoning? I mean, you could stick a number of things in this X kind of point. And so I kind of just wanted to briefly chat about kind of what happens before an application even gets to our office. So we, as well as I know the City Development Services Office, we have what we call our info desk, where we have a planner that's on call basically from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day of the week. And that's usually where we get our first questions, is somebody calls saying, I want to split my property and I want to rezone it, or I want to, do whatever. And that's where we kind of start and we say, okay, well, what's it zoned? We look at the property information system. There's a lot of layers that are on that. And then ultimately, sometimes we actually ask them and say, okay, you're asking a little more of an in-depth question. You should come and do a scoping meeting and start that kind of process that actually ends up becoming, a pre-application or kind of that start of that. And sometimes people come to the scoping meetings just themselves as a property owner, and they get into it realizing, oh, I need a consultant to help me come up with a lot of the things that you guys are asking for. Or they'll reach out after talking to us and find a consultant and then start that scoping and development kind of questions. The other thing we do is we have weekly current planning staff meetings. So not only does Matt and Nick and Tim and Todd and Jenny and I all meet, but then we also have a weekly meeting where we involve all of the long range staff as well. We talk about bigger topics like growth policy and zone change, regulation, or our zoning text amendment and things like that. So we really start trying to bring more of these topics up and say, hey, what do we all think about this? Is this something that we should just tell them right off the bat? Like, hey, no, don't even bother coming to a scoping meeting, or, bouncing ideas around and saying, well, what do we think about this? What do we think about that? And trying to get kind of those informal discussions kind of happening before somebody spends $4,000 for a zone change application or something like that. And part of that as well is we start doing all this research into the applicable plans. And so we start having to really dig down because we don't all have them memorized. I don't have them memorized. But, what actually digging into it and saying, what does it recommend? All aspects of the designation. As Tim mentioned, it's an art, not a science. There's generally not a one size fits all category. And so we really have to take that time and discuss it internally as well before it gets to you guys. We use the information available to make our best decision at the time. Obviously, hindsight is always 20/20. What happened in the past definitely influences, what's going to happen in the future. But we try to make the best decision that we all come to as a consensus at that time with what's presented to us in that moment. And obviously, sometimes people just do what they want to do, regardless of what we tell them to do as well. And sometimes those can be the harder projects because either staff's recommending denial or recommending approval with a list of 50 conditions, or it makes those public meetings really more controversial and really more difficult because we get all this comment, but maybe that comment isn't necessarily tied to a specific criteria that we can say, well, we can't recommend denial because it doesn't fit that criteria, but that doesn't mean their comment isn't valid or it isn't a worthwhile comment. So, we generally try to help people as best as we can. And sometimes obviously what we feel as a planning staff fits maybe isn't what the community ends up feeling is a good fit for that. And so that's where that happens too. But I think the main thing I wanted you guys to be aware of is it's not necessarily, one staff member that's coming, advocating for a project. We really try to discuss it internally and come to you with, all of our brains together with what we think is a good application, or the best application that we can get the developer to submit as well. So one of the things that comes up is these ways to help planning board members on these tough projects. So one of them obviously if needing more information, if you have issues with the packet or accessing files, I mean, some of those are just the basic questions, right? The basic times that we can, as staff, can help. One thing that I was going to give you as a suggestion is contacting staff that's reviewing the application. When I was in Whitefish, I had a city council member that was on our planning board, and I loved him because he would always call me like 2 days before the planning board meeting or the city council meeting and say, Bailey, I have a list of questions for you. And he would give me a list of questions, say, I'm going to ask you this at the meeting. And he would give me 2 days to basically go and research his questions and come up with answers, either pros or cons or why I can't or why I couldn't. And that, number one, made the discussion way easier going forward, but it also made me feel more prepared as a staff member and not on the spot to go, I don't know what's going on. So that's just an idea. Now, the one caveat I will say to this is if you're going to email, make sure you're not emailing the entire board. Just reach out to that one staff member, just you individually. Or sometimes the better way is just to pick up the phone and call us and say, hey, here's my questions that I have. As part of that, also, if you identify any additional information that you need to feel better prepared, whether that's, hey, I can't find this land use plan that you're referencing in the application or in the staff report, where can I find this on the website? Or, never feel like you can't reach out to us to help find some of that information or to answer some of these questions. We're always, I'm sure Dave would agree, staff members are there to help you. We want to have a good discussion. And so we want to facilitate these types of meetings and help the public understand as well. So if you guys who know a little bit more than the average bear on land use, if you can't understand it, then obviously the public isn't going to understand it. And that's something that we don't want to keep continuing down the road. And so the other thing is doing what we're currently doing ongoing, are these short presentations from other agencies like Aaron this evening. We've had, I think Josh was interested in like the conservation district, reached out. We've talked about maybe MDT being able from Aaron. So some of these things are trying to get more information to help you guys feel a little bit more prepared for some of these conversations that we have down the road. And that's what I had this evening. And it was just a starting point. And obviously, I figured there were going to be some questions that are going to pop up that may lead us totally off topic. But those were kind of a number of the topics that came up in a couple of emails as far as just information on it. So at this time, if you guys have questions, I would love to try to answer them. And see, or if you need more information, we can pick another time to do it as well. I don't want to keep you guys too late tonight. So
thank you so much for that, Bailey and Tim. Super, super helpful. At least for me, to understand the tip of the iceberg that we see at the meeting. It just represents a small portion of everything that goes on behind the scenes. And we often hear about it from members of the public and representatives of the developers, all these other steps in the process. So it's really cool to see that. Are there any questions from planning board members? Okay.
I have a quick one. Could you just clarify, Bailey, thank you. That was great. Great summary. I guess I'm just wondering about these old subdivisions that were approved 10, 15 years ago that haven't been built and they were approved at a time when we were thinking differently, I hope, about, development and development in greenfields. So could you just clarify for me, like the timing on that and like where it goes? if it has to come back up for review, if something changes?
Yeah, so most of those are ones that they either have things like phasing plans that were established at the time of approval, or they've had extensions. Usually those are kind of the two ones. Like the O'Keefe Ranch is a good one. It's had both. It had phasing plans when it was approved. Those phasing plans were extended. The phasing plans were changed. Extensions were granted. And now we're set with kind of where it is right now. And so a lot of those are kind of stuck in this wheel where they won't necessarily come back to planning board unless the developer either needs, like, as the O'Keefe one is a great example, they wanted to connect to sewer. They need zoning in order to do that. That's a city policy to get that sewer connection. So that's why it came back up to you. The other times you see them are condition amendments. Obviously, if they want to go back and change a condition and say, oh, we don't want to do this, those are the times when it does come back up to planning board as well. But if they aren't needing anything like a rezoning or a condition amendment, then no, you guys won't see them come back. They just ultimately, hopefully, end up going and doing their infrastructure and going through the final plat process and going through that. So it is kind of hard because a lot of times, you read something in the paper and you're like, man, I thought we dealt with that like 5 years ago. What is going on? And so that is kind of the hard part with some of these ones when they do have these longer phasing plans. And I know a lot of our regulation, at least the county, we have changed some of our regulations now in regards to phasing plans and lengths of extensions and when they can ask for them and how many times they can ask for them. But they are these ones that are from the early 2000s or even earlier than that are basically all before those regulations, and therefore they're kind of these little outlier ones that are just kind of hopefully either going to go away or they're actually going to do something.
There's not.
I was gonna add to that, Bailey. In 2017, the legislature adopted 763617, which basically put a 20-year horizon on what they termed phased developments. There was no real phasing called out in state law prior to 2017. So Neva, a lot of those older projects, the 2005 and 2010 projects, they had a life prior to that new statute going into effect in 2017. So yes, we do have these legacy projects, and they're actually getting legs now, obviously, because of the demand that we're seeing.
Yeah.
But we're really not going to see, I don't believe, that same phenomenon happen from 2017 forward, because the statute now says you get a 20-year horizon for all your phases, and then that's it. There's no more.
Okay, thank you, Tim. That clarifies the 2017 thing, because someone had mentioned that to me and I was like, why was that a cutoff? But that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Bailey or Tim? Okay, seeing none, thanks again, Bailey and Tim. That was really, really helpful. Is there a way could we make the presentation available to planning board members in any way?
Yes, I can. I can definitely send that to you guys. I was kind of finishing at the last minute today, so that's why it didn't get sent out ahead of time. But yes, I was planning to either I'll talk to Donna and see if it needs to get attached or if I can just send it all to you guys just as an email. Here it is. So
perfect.
And I was going to say, if you have other questions that you think of after tonight, please reach out. I'm always available, as I'm sure Dave would say as well. He's always available, so don't be shy.
Great. Yeah, I especially liked the recommendation, Bailey. I think it's a really good recommendation to offer. Taking questions from planning board members prior to the case, especially with some of our bigger cases. It takes us all a long time to review these things, and we can really kind of prime ourselves for a efficient meeting and getting all the information we need if we can kind of do that. So please, all of us, if you consider doing that in the future, when I'm sure we'll have some bigger subdivisions coming to us in no time. So great. Thanks again, Bailey and Tim. Oh, Dave, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. But the other thing I'd like to add is, the question came up, I think Tony asked it earlier about how the planning board can play a role, how the planning board can help. And I think the planning board has a really big role in helping to decide priorities. And so I guess what I would suggest to you all is, if there are things, the board should have some deliberation from time to time on things that they think the city and the county should really focus on. And have discussion at your meetings. It might be a special time set aside for kind of priorities for things that you'd like to see the city and county address, and then make those recommendations through city and county staff, and then it'll work its way up to the elected officials. But I think we've talked, for example, about a larger scale zoning process, or I'm sure there are other priorities as well, but that's just kind of one that's been talked about recently and came up tonight. I think, if the board, you don't have budget authority, it's not as though you're directing, and you don't have staff at your fingertips necessarily, but at the same time, you can make your priorities known, things that you'd like to see addressed. And I think if you do that, if you get together, talk about priorities, suggest ways to, address certain issues that come to the fore that you think deserve time and effort and budget, then I think you can make those things known, and then we at the staff level can run up the flagpole.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for offering that perspective.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. And the planning board has expressed the desire and the need to rezone the city since 2015. And, not these people who are on it today, but it has come up over and over again. And, so I want to believe that, we can express these interests in somebody's hearing. I hope they are, but I haven't seen any movement in this direction, none. And this county is about to zone the peri-urban area because they did the land use designations with the growth policy, and now they're going to put it into zoning, which is the way it should be. And we just haven't done that in the city. And we have expressed it over and over and over again. So I appreciate your welcoming attitude, and has nothing to do with you personally, but nobody's hearing us on this.
Well, Neva, I appreciate you continuing to bring that up. I hope that folks are hearing us, and we do have new leadership in the community and development department. Can't recall the name off the top of my head, but hopefully we'll see more in the future in this area. Karen, welcome. Would you like to join the conversation here?
Sure. I was just going to echo what Vince said. The leadership has changed again with the city, so they're you never know. So keep at it, Neva. Don't lose heart. The other thing that we've talked about in the past, and based on the discussion may be of interest, is as we go through budgeting and work planning processes, both for the city and the county, the planning board can ask for us, and we've offered periodically, but it might be time in the not so far future to have the city and county come and talk about work plans for the coming year. This is when we're thinking about it, and when we're prepared, we're working with council and commission to prepare budgets. So with that in mind, so that might be of interest, so that what's on the docket in terms of city and county priorities for their planning programs. And you can see maybe if some of your wish list is already on the list, or if there's things that aren't, maybe learn why.
Great. Another great recommendation. Thanks, Karen. Hopefully we can do some of that in the coming months. Okay, any other further questions for Bailey, Tim, or Karen while we've got them here? Or Dave? All right, thanks again, everyone, for sticking here and
Thank you,
making that
guys.
presentation. That was great.
Great, very good.
Okay, moving on. Tonight we have one item of new business, which is the election of a vice president for the remainder of this calendar year. So we do need to have a vice president who could serve this role in running the meetings in the event that I'm gone. So I would entertain a motion to nominate a vice president, and then the motion will be seconded and we'll vote on it. Neva.
I was wondering, Sean, if you might be interested in being vice president. You've been on for a while, and you know, you're so thoughtful, and anyway, I would be happy to nominate you if it's something you feel like you can take on. I've never felt that way, so I understand if you can't.
Thank you very much, and Neva, I appreciate that. I am still a little hesitant to take that role on because of my children's circumstances, which you all see coming in the room to get their cape tied on. I was kind of thinking about Josh, even though he's not here. However, I will say if nobody takes up the role, I'd be happy to do that. But I'm a little hesitant with my child situation. Little older, just a little older.
Well, Josh would be great. Or
Yeah,
Shane. Shane's been on the board a while. I think it helps to have people who've been on for a little while. And so.
Or Dave Loomis.
Dave Loomis, planner par excellence.
Shane, last time we did, or Dave, you're about to talk again.
I appreciate the confidence. I have a home situation here also where I disappear to take care of business at the house. And so similar to, but different than Sean. So I couldn't do it. And I appreciate just being here and having good discussion. I think we're on to a good roll now about sharing information. So thank you, but no.
Thanks, Dave.
Shane,
last time we had this conversation, which wasn't too long ago, I think there was a conversation. It seemed like you were potentially interested at the time before we nominated Caroline, but not sure if being an alternate was allowable at the time, and so wondering where you're at, if you're still interested at all, or now that you are a full member, that would not be an issue. So don't look to hold you back. You are muted somehow. It doesn't look like you're muted, but I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm interested right now either, just with commitments with the TPCC. I think I'm in enough meetings and some other Tuesday commitments that happen from time to time. So I don't think that's, I don't think I'm interested right now. Thank you though.
Thanks, Shane. Nita?
I'd like to see if we could check in with Josh and revisit this at the next meeting.
I think that's the course of action we should take. I agree. Yep.
And get a few other, and Andy's been on the board for a long time too. So.
Yeah, so I will write to both of them and see if either of them are interested. We'll pick this up, table to the next meeting, and all of you as well. Think about it as well, and if you have a change of heart, feel free to express that at the next meeting. So
yeah.
Great.
Thanks again to the staff. Really great presentations tonight.
Absolutely. So we have one more item on the agenda, the section where we have comments from planning board members. I know Sean has a comment he wanted to make tonight. And of course, it's our time to speak our minds on anything we'd like. So Sean, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Vince. It's just a simple announcement. The Missoula Farmers Market, which is the older market up at the X's, is in need of board members, is looking for board members. If anybody on here, or if you know of anybody that would be interested in serving the oldest, longest running farmers market in Missoula, they could definitely use the help. Just been a, tough year, and we're down to a few members. And President's just had a personal, loss in her life. So we're reaching out. So I'm just trying to get the word out there. So that's it. And if you are interested or know anybody, they can email me or the farmers market directly, or the market manager maybe. But you can get a hold of me. Frank's Little Farm, everything. frank'slittlefarm@gmail.com, Instagram, whatever.
Great, thanks, Sean. Anyone else? Shane.
I guess I wanted to thank Neva for all of her comments today. I thought that they were really well thought through and spot on. And in case anybody is actually listening, from my perspective, I am also interested in the city undergoing a comprehensive zoning review and rezone. And so wanted to get that on the record, and hopefully somebody is listening out there.
Okay, if there's no other comments from folks, thanks again for tonight. Great meeting. Nice to see you all. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and thanks to Donna and Heather for always putting things together.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.
Night, everybody.